Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Josiah Bates. Last name is spelled Bates. He just published a book, at least on Amazon. It was May 28th, 2024. Full title is In These Streets, Reporting from the Front Lines of Inner City Gun Violence. It's a really interesting book. I enjoyed reading through it. And it's different than some of the academic books I've read about kind of law and order or law enforcement or the legal system, in that really takes you to the streets and talks to people who have personal stories about this crisis of gun shooting and gun violence, especially in certain cities like the for example, like Chicago is almost kind of like a war zone, but he's in New York. But this is his first book, and I'm delighted to have him. So, Josiah Bates, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, the book is it's really just an extension of the criminal justice coverage I've done over the last 6 or 7 years, I would say. I started out working at Time Magazine, where I was covering criminal justice issues, and while I was there, this was when in 2020 when George Floyd was killed, and doing a lot of coverage around that. And then around that same time, there was this surge in gun violence that happened across the country, and I was covering that in real time as well. And I was hearing a lot of the same things from people in different communities, just about why this is still an issue that we're dealing with, and that there's solutions to it, and we need to apply these solutions. And hearing all of those things, I just thought it could be interesting to write a book about it, looking at that current moment, or that moment, and proposing some of those solutions. And when I was doing research, I had noticed that there really hadn't been a book about gun violence that was really told from that community perspective that you explained at the beginning. There's a lot of academic books out there, a lot of books from the law enforcement perspective, a lot of books from the policy perspective, but not really many from the community side. So that was what I wanted to focus on when I wrote this book, and also focus on laying out the solutions. So that's just a little bit of background on how the book came together.
Can you talk about how your research, because you have a whole host of first person accounts of people who've experienced gun violence, who've been shot, who are in from the inner city. Can you talk about the research and kind of the background steps you took to put the book together?
Yeah, it was just, again, because I had been covering the topic, I developed a lot of sources in a lot of different cities. But with the book, I just had to take it to a whole nother level. So it was a lot of contacting of community orgs in different cities, who would then in turn put me in touch with everyday people. I did some traveling as well. So going to different organizations, different community board meetings, and just doing as much outreach as I could. And I really wanted to highlight those voices, because I felt like we don't hear enough from those voices when we talk about gun violence. When you look at some of the mainstream coverage, or some of the discussions we have about it, we focus too much on some of the other facets of it, and not enough on the community side. So I really wanted to dig into that when I was doing my reporting. So it was just a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, a lot of knocking on doors, and things of that nature. It took a lot, but I'm happy with the way it came together.
Yeah, so you have a lot of those first person, but also you kind of are in the boroughs of New York City, so you've seen and heard stories yourself. So it's also somewhat personal. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I opened the book, the preface. I talk a lot about my own family's experience with gun violence, and kind of go into all the different relatives, parents, cousins, uncles, who have all had experiences, and myself having experiences. And the reason I did that, the book itself is not about me, and it's not about my family, but the reason I did that was to show just kind of how widespread this problem is. I think some of the perception around gun violence, especially inner city gun violence, is it's just people that are deciding to pick up a gun, or it's just people that are deciding to be involved in activities that they shouldn't be, when in reality this issue, it impacts all facets of these communities, where you can have someone like myself, who I was never out in the streets, I wasn't hanging out on the block or anything like that, but because of the neighborhood I grew up in, and because it was a problem in our neighborhood, it impacted me, it impacted other members of my family. So I wanted to highlight that, and I thought, a good way to do it would be to talk about my own family and some of our experiences before I got into the kind of nuts and bolts of the issue overall.
And the rise of gun violence is really something unique. So even in the last years, it's increased. Is that correct?
Yeah, so essentially what happened is in 2020, and there's a lot of debate about this, but from my perspective and from some research that's out there, in 2020, around the time COVID started, the pandemic started, we were seeing these increases in the across the country in different cities. It really took off though in the summer after George Floyd was killed, where you had this significant surge across the country, where by the end of 2020, it was it was a record homicide rate from 2019 to 2020. It went up 30%, which was the largest single year increase in I think about 50 years. And most of it was driven by homicide. So that year it went up significantly. In 2021, it went up a little bit as well. And then in 2022, it started decreasing, but it was still at a higher level than it was prior to the pandemic, or prior to George Floyd in 2019. Now we're in a place where the numbers nationally are starting to go down, where by the end of this year, we might end up having one of the greatest single year decreases that we've ever had in the country. So it really ebbs and flows. But one of the points I make in the book is, the national numbers, they ebb and flow from time to time, but it's important to know that in the communities that struggle with it historically, it's always been a problem there, regardless of what the national numbers tend to say. So we need to apply the solutions that I lay out, and the solutions that a lot of activists and researchers and academics call for. We need to apply those consistently in the short term and in the long term, so that we can have a positive impact on it for years to come, and stop with the ebb and flow that happens around the issue.
And can you talk about the cost? I mean, the cost, not just in monetary, I mean, monetary figures, you have those in your book, but also just the general cost of gun violence in inner cities.
Oh yeah, it completely destroys any economic viability of a community. If you think about a neighborhood, let's just say a neighborhood in Brooklyn, where there's constantly shootings every day on one particular block. You got to think about what that does for the long-term sustainability of that block financially. Businesses will leave, residents will leave the block. All of a sudden now it's just a block with abandoned buildings, and that destroys any opportunity for people. So if you take that one block and apply it to a few different areas in the neighborhood, it destroys any chance of people in those communities to have some type of financial sustainability in the long term. So that's just the financial cost, and that's difficult to track, just because it varies from city to city, but you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And then obviously when you think about, you can't put a price on somebody's life. So you think about the amount of families that have lost loved ones, that have to bury loved ones, that have to deal with all of that. Like that type of stuff is priceless. So that's another part of this issue that I don't think the general public thinks about enough when we're talking about how this destroys communities financially and economically, and just the impact that it has on people's livelihoods. Again, whether or not you're the one picking up a gun or not.
Right. So it has kind of it's like dropping a pebble in a clear lake. Like there's ripples that go through a community, but
100%.
also a lot of it isn't. There's a lot of third party people getting shot. Like maybe the public perception is two guys get a gun and shoot, but that's not the case. Like the story of the basketball player, super talented basketball player, was just at a party. Maybe you could tell some of those stories of like the innocent people who get caught in the crossfire.
Absolutely. It's one of the most heartbreaking aspects of this is a lot of times when there might be a conflict between two people or a conflict between two gangs or whatever, a lot of times it's the innocent bystander that gets shot. And that story you mentioned is a story out of Harlem where a young man, he was a legend in the neighborhood, played basketball at one of the local high schools, was playing D1 basketball at a school in Texas, came home uh, after his junior year and was just home in his neighborhood, was out the weekend, I think of a Father's Day weekend. He was out at a barbecue, and this was in 2022, and there was a lot of people out. It was late at night, and all of a sudden, two groups of people got into a conflict. They started shooting at each other, and about, I want to say 10 or 12 people were injured, but that young man was killed. And we see stories like that that same type of story can be found in many inner city communities, and it's just heartbreaking because someone like that, they're not going to get the attention when in the aftermath, because inner city gun violence, community gun violence, whatever you want to refer to it as, it's something that's just kind of accepted in these kind of neighborhoods. So when someone like him is killed, when an innocent bystander is killed, you see people, offer condolences and stuff, but we just kind of move on because we've accepted that there are certain neighborhoods in America where this type of gun violence is tolerable, and it's just heartbreaking because you have people like him whose lives are cut short for no reason other than they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right. It's Darius Lee was his name, right?
Yes,
Like I
yes.
remember hearing that story, and there's a lot of stories like that, like kids getting shot, recriminations, false identification. Somebody thinks that he's a member of a rival gang, somebody walking home from school. So it's just the randomness of the violence at times, and I think a lot of that is happening is not good. But there's also, it happens in the context of the inner city and the police. Can you talk about the relationship between what you think or what your take is on the inner city and the police? When I know there's a lot of kind of distrust, maybe you could address that.
Yeah, so that's a very complicated aspect to all of this. The police and residents in inner city communities for decades now have had a very tense relationship. You can point to all different factors that drove that. Whether it's how police reacted to the crack cocaine epidemic in the late '80s, to the crime bill in the '90s, where the mandate for police departments across the country changed, to the various incidents of unlawful police killings and the reaction that communities and residents have to that. So that relationship is tense, and the issue with that is that tense relationship is what drives the distrust that people have in the police. And it also makes the police job more difficult when they're trying to investigate, or when they're trying to solve homicides, or when they're trying to address crimes. People don't want to talk to them. People don't want to interact with them. The police tend to have difficult relationships with community groups, and they haven't built the dynamic with those community groups where they can build some type of relationship or build some type of connection. And all of that, again, is just a cycle that leads to more of the violence that we see. And then when you have situations like what happened in 2020 with George Floyd, and everything that came after that with the defund the police movement and stuff, you hear anecdotally from different cities, police taking a step back from the proactive measures, or taking a step back from their responsibilities, where they let certain things slide, and they're not policing, or they're not out in the streets the way they should be, and in turn that can lead to more violence. This is a very complicated sort of aspect of this discussion, and we can get into some more of these details, but the reality is the police have a role to play in this. They need to be more strategic and more direct in how they're addressing violent crime and gun violence in these communities. but they have to do it without being. They have to do it without criminalizing entire neighborhoods. They have to do it without criminalizing entire communities, and they have to build some type of dynamic with people in these neighborhoods, or they're never going to have the type of impact they should have.
Right. It was interesting. Like that was the first time I heard the terms over and under policing. So the policing isn't what you think it might. I mean, maybe an outsider, somebody who doesn't live there, like some of the application doesn't happen just because of mutual distrust. So George Floyd didn't happen in some vacuum. There was a pre-perception of abuses, which I mean, I think there's real stories out there of like unnecessary shootings, things like that. So. I mean, I think that's part of the law. Like you said, it's a complicated kind of tapestry, but that's one of it. And I thought the vignette you had about Simon, the guy who wrote The Wire, was interesting because Baltimore has that similar problem. And what was his take? He had kind of an interest. Wasn't he the one who used that word over and under policing?
Yeah, he's the one that quoted saying the communities are being over policed and under policed at the same time, which I thought was pretty fascinating the way he broke it down, basically saying that the police have focused on the wrong thing. They're over policing, but in the wrong way, right? Stopping and frisking, drug offenses, focusing on these things that don't actually drive down violent crime. But what they're not doing is targeted investigations into very specific people in very specific areas that are struggling with violent crime. That takes more work, that takes more effort, that takes more money. And that hasn't been the mandate for police departments since the war on drugs started, which is something that David Simon is very passionate about. But that hasn't been the mandate from police departments since we started the war on drugs. The mandate has been drug deterrence, like focusing on drug dealers and drug users. And so that's kind of the breakdown of you're over policing, but you're also under policing at the same time. And we haven't been able to, in a large scale way across the entire country, we haven't been able to find that middle ground where you're not violating everyone's civil rights, but you're focusing on the specific people who are harming the community and hurting the community. Because one thing people don't realize about inner city gun violence is it's not, you don't have a bunch of people in these communities running around shooting people. It's if you look at the community as a whole, it's a very small percentage of the community, of people in the community that are involved in this. And if the police took more, had more strategy in their actions, they could identify those people. There are examples that we have from the past in different cities of police doing that, and the impact that had on violent crime in the city. And so, or in that specific city. So it is something that the police are capable of doing. It's just a matter of whether or not the departments and the leaders in those cities have the political will to do it.
Right. And you talk about the defund police, but that's not, I mean, that's kind of in the public mind, I think, through the media, but it's not necessarily getting less money. Would you agree with that? Is that true?
So it is in part. So the defund the police movement, at its essence, the argument or the term was misused by different people. They were taking it to mean something that it didn't mean. What it meant was take funding from inflated police budgets and apply it to different social services, other avenues, other root causes that impact violent crime. Now, there were some people who used it to mean abolish the police. There were some people who it was just used in a lot of different ways. But all it was supposed to be about was taking funding from police departments and applying it to some of the other avenues that impact violent crime and other issues going on in these communities.
Do you think that that's an effective means to curtail inner city gun violence?
I think it can be. I think the issue is when you get into the conversation of removing police from these communities, that's where it gets tricky. I have not, and I can only speak from my experiences and my reporting. I've spoken with a lot of different people in a lot of different communities. different experts and so on and so forth. There's no one I've spoken to that lives in these communities that says they don't want the police there. That's not the argument that they make. What they say is they just don't want the police to target and abuse everybody. They want the police to focus on the people who are committing violent crime, but they don't want the police gone. Now, there are different academics, there are different people, some people in the abolitionist movement that make the argument that we need to just get rid of police right away and focus on these other avenues. I personally don't think that's the way we need to go. And I haven't spoken to anybody that lives in any of these communities that think that's the way we need to go. But that is an argument that some people make. But that wasn't the argument, my understanding of the argument of the defund movement when it started. It was about taking some funding from police departments and putting it into some other avenues.
Right, but that's a form of investment. But if the police were targeting the real violent criminals, like the felonious criminals, that would open up so many opportunities for economic redevelopment or investment or things like that if people know they were safe. So I think you're right. It's like a small minority. What do you think, like this kind of investment? I mean, is it worthwhile to invest in places in the inner city if there's still violent crimes taking place? I mean, I think a lot of these urban areas where there's a lot of violent crime, big corporations and things are moving out. They're reinvesting. And what are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question, because it's kind of like the chicken and the egg, where it's like violent crime drives poverty, but poverty also drives violent crime. So it's like, how do we address it? I think you need to do both. I think cities need to invest in these neighborhoods while also investing in actions against violent crime in the present, right? If you talk to certain experts and academics, they don't believe investment will play a role in addressing violent crime, especially not in the short term. Could it be is it something that can have an impact in the long term? I believe it can, just because I know the makeup of these communities. A lot of the people that are involved in some of these activities, the way it starts out as just a means of opportunity. It starts out as a means of making some money or doing something where you can provide for yourself, and then it turns into something else. So I think cities definitely need to invest. You can invest in the schools in these neighborhoods. You can invest in the social services in these neighborhoods. You can invest in the community groups that are out doing the work. You can fix up some of these vacant houses, these vacant properties in these communities, and build affordable houses. Like, that's how you can invest in the community while also investing in the public safety measures to address violent crime and shooting.
I think the mayor of Baltimore did just that this year. I think he said, "Hey, you want a house for $1? Come back in here and rebuild these houses that are abandoned or something." So I think those are good ideas.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuances to what happened in Baltimore, but yeah, and different cities are trying some of this stuff. It was obviously in 2020, this was the big talking point and something that a lot of cities were considering. I think now that we're a little removed from it, we're seeing some cities step away. That different cities are stepping away from some of the community-led violence intervention programs, which I think is a mistake. The whole point of those is you got to commit to them in the long term, so that they can have an impact now, but they can consistently have an impact in the future. But yeah, different cities, you're seeing it sprinkled around in different cities and different neighborhoods.
Interesting. And what is your opinion on the criminal justice system itself? Not just the police, but the fact that some of these guys are going through the system over and over. Do you feel, or is your opinion or view that has to be adjusted as well? Or what's your opinion on the impact of just the general criminal justice system?
Yeah, I mean, look, the criminal justice system is flawed. Like, I don't think anyone can argue otherwise. We have a very flawed system, and it can be a bit arbitrary as well. I think the system needs to focus more on rehabilitation rather than being punitive. In the book, for example, the character who I follow throughout the whole book is a Brooklyn-based violence prevention worker. He's someone who goes out into the community and tries to resolve conflicts that are happening or that could be happening. And he's someone who he grew up in the 80s. He was in the streets. He was getting into shootouts, robbing people and stuff. Went to prison at a really young age, about 16 or 17, was in prison for about 20 years, really rehabilitated himself and came out and now wants to, for the past 10 years, has been a positive impact in his community. In an ideal world, that's the scenario, right? Someone, they go to prison, they pay. If you're going to go to prison, if you committed a crime and you have to pay the price for that, if you can come out, if you're able to come out, you come out rehabilitated. You don't come out, ready to commit crimes again. So I think our criminal justice system, absolutely, there are flaws. We need to focus more on rehabilitating and helping people, especially I would say young people, rather than just locking somebody away and throwing the key away, because we know now we have years and years of data that doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It's just you're ensuring recidivism.
Exactly.
The system itself doesn't work. It's corrupt in the sense that you just kind of rubber stamp people and nobody's really looking at the individual. It's incredible. Exactly. It's incredible that we still do it. And I think that nonviolent crimes are, in my opinion, it doesn't make sense. Like, it's a nonviolent crime and you're inhibiting somebody from being a functioning, productive member of society for nonviolence, whether it's a drug crime or whatever. It's like, wow. Yeah. I mean, it's creating these kind of things. I think the kind of penal system itself may even make people more violent.
It can.
So, yeah. So I think that's another. So if you look over all these problems, these some of these cities, New York, Chicago, Baltimore, what do you think, like, you have the kind of epilogue, the path, or what's the evidence that actually shows a solution to the problem?
Yeah. So the big point with the solutions, I would say, is one, there's not one solution to gun violence. I think we've, as a country and in individual cities, have tried the one solution approach, which is the just lock everybody up approach. And that clearly hasn't worked. So I think the solutions, again, there's multiple, right? We have to attack this from different sides. So we have to attack the poverty side of things. We have to address the policing side and the effective policing side of things. We also need to figure out a way to get a handle on gun laws, right? Our gun laws aren't standardized. Different states there's some states with strong gun laws. There's some states with weak gun laws, but you have states with strong ones that still struggle with gun violence. For example, New York, right? New York has some of the strongest gun laws in the country, but the city still struggles with gun violence because guns from weaker states get into New York. So I think there's not one solution to the problem. We have to apply all the different proposed solutions at the same time. We need to really evaluate what's being done on the ground. That's another big component of this. It's not just about trying something and just seeing if it works. Like, we need to really evaluate what's happening. We need to gather data and information and see if what's happening in one city can be applied to another city. Because one thing about gun violence and crime as a overall is, as much as it's a national conversation and a national discussion, it's a very local issue. It's something that, gun violence prevention in Newark, New Jersey may not look the same in Baltimore, right? They could probably take some things that are being done in Newark and apply it to Baltimore, but every city is different. So each city needs to really evaluate what's happening on the ground and what specifically what specifically they need to do to address the problem.
Is it true that a lot of the gun violence is committed by kind of younger perpetrators?
That's actually kind of a myth. Anecdotally, it is, and there are certain cities where there's a lot of youth violence. I know Philadelphia, maybe last year or the year before, they had a real issue with youth gun violence. Same with Richmond, Virginia last year had an issue with youth gun violence, or maybe in 2022. But the average age of a shooter, so to speak, is like mid to late 20s. So it's not, but the reason you want to address things at the youth age is because you want to do enough to prevent, like the whole point is to do enough, take enough proactive actions to prevent somebody from going down the path where they feel like they need to pick up a gun. Right? The main character that I talk about in the book, he picked up a gun when he was like 12 or 13 because he had moved from he was living in a on a decent block in Bed-Stuy. There was a fire that burned down his house. He ended up having to move to the projects, and he was just in this environment where there was a lot of this stuff. You know, people had guns, people were doing drugs. He was seeing all of that, and he was drawn to it. And he picked up a gun at a young age, and then all of a sudden now he's a stick-up kid. So even though on average it's adults doing it, the whole point is you want to do enough preventive work at the beginning where they're not, by the time they're an adult, they're not picking up a gun and getting involved in the streets. So that's why the focus on youth, I believe, is very important. And you're seeing a lot of cities focus on youth, reaching the youth. A lot of these programs in different cities are about, getting to the youth, talking to the youth and things like that. So even though the average age isn't a kid, it's still important to reach the kids and address this problem with kids.
And do you think kind of decriminalization has anything to do with gun violence? The lack of prosecution maybe for crimes under, like in California, I think it's $950 or something. Do you believe that has any impact?
I think it does in different cities. I know Washington D.C. There's a huge conflict going on between the U.S. Attorney's Office not prosecuting gun crimes and the police department not bringing them cases or bringing them arrests that they're not prosecuting. I think that plays a role, but again, as I said earlier, there's not one factor that drives this. So I think it does play a role. I do feel like sometimes people they point to that as being like the main reason or like the only factor, and I don't believe that that's true.
Have you ever heard of Ephesians asks, have you ever heard of gun crates being dropped? Do you think that there's outside forces encouraging gun violence? Do you think that's possible or plausible?
In terms of what, like people?
Well, just like if you remember some of the George Floyd riots, they had mysteriously all these bricks showed up on the streets.
Oh, I don't really believe that. There's not a whole lot of evidence to support that. Now, I will say the way these guns are getting into the community, that's something that's probably a way to look at it, where these guns aren't being brought into the community for the most part by community members. They're being trafficked in. So that's something. Is it just like somebody driving in and dropping a bunch of a box of guns and just leaving it on the street? That's not happening. But the black market, the way these guns are trafficked into the community, that's something that's been a problem for decades. So
who do you think is trafficking him? Is it the mob? Is it the cartels? Like how is it? Because there is a gun culture. Not like you said, it's a small minority, but I've seen some clips online. These guys have modified guns.
Yeah.
Modified clips. It's pretty intense.
I mean, it's gun traffickers. It's people that sell guns in the market, in the legal market, and they're brought into these communities. It's straw purchases where you have someone who's a legal resident or who can legally own a gun, buying a gun for someone who can't legally own one. So it's all different ways that guns get into the communities. It could be, gangs buying a bunch of guns from another state and bringing them into a community. So there's a lot of different ways that it happens. And
Do
it's
you
I'm sorry, go ahead.
do you
Go ahead.
think the gangs are really a key component of the violence, or is it just kind of individual persons? Like,
There,
how much is it due to gangs?
it's a small percentage. I think nationally it's about 10%. If you look at individual neighborhoods, it can be larger than that, but gun violence is typically in these communities is typically driven just by conflicts between individuals. It could be a group of people hanging out outside, and because they live in a neighborhood where they feel like they have to carry a gun, two guys get into an argument, someone pulls out a gun and shoots. And then now that person that got shot, now his brother wants retaliation, so he's going to get a gun and he's going to try and kill the person that killed his brother, but he accidentally hit somebody else, and then somebody else. Like, it's a cycle. So it's not all just gangs. Gangs are certainly a part of it, and when you're talking about gangs, that to me goes back to the strategic policing that needs to happen. Because if you know there are gangs in a community that's driving most of the violence, that's where the police should be focused. They don't need to focus on everyday people that are just walking around. But gangs are a part of it.
And you talked about the crack epidemic as kind of being a watermark or something from this gun violence. Do you think that kind of the culture encourages maybe suggestible youth in the inner city to become part of this gun culture? Do you think that has an impact, or do you think that that's overwrought or overstated?
If you talk to old folks in these communities, they'll all say that. They'll all blame, whether it's, you want to call it gun culture or drug culture or the music and stuff. Look, I don't think it would be genuine to blame rap music or drug culture on all the gun violence that we see. Now, again, does it influence kids? Absolutely. You shouldn't, I don't think some of this music or some of this the stuff we have with the culture is for children. But when people want to just point to that, I think they're doing that in a way that ignores some of the societal and systemic issues that drive this. So it plays a role. Again, it's something that could play a role in this, but I don't think it's fair to say that's one of the only reasons, and that's why everything is happening. But there are people that try to make that argument.
There's kind of a long roster of rappers with some pretty rough content that have died. Like, I think of the guy XXX Temptation, and then here I live in LA. This guy Nipsey Hussle,
Yeah.
Like a great guy. He seemed like a really not even a violent guy, actually. Not kind of maybe not as dark as my understanding as maybe some of his other styles of rap, but he unfortunately lost his life. Like, I see murals and pictures of him everywhere, so he's well remembered. But
so
it's a shame. It's such a loss. It's such a loss.
Nipsey's death was a huge deal, and something. You're right. That had nothing to do with gangs or anything. That was just a very unfortunate situation. But there's this emergence, or there's been this emergence over the past decade or so of subgenre in rap called drill music, which, just to explain it kind of quickly, is gang members getting involved in the rap game, and they're talking about, if you listen to some of the music, it's a big deal in Chicago, and it's driven a lot of the gun violence that we've seen in Chicago over the past decade. But they're getting on songs and they're talking about real conflicts that are going on between these different gangs. So that is definitely driving some of what we see in very specific communities, right? And because rap music, most of the times in the past, even though rap artists have had beef for years, a lot of times you're speaking like more hypothetically. But when you look at certain drill artists, they're talking very specifically. They're naming specific people that they've either have a conflict with or specific people that they've killed. And that, so yes, that is something that that certainly plays a role in different communities. And I even think, you know, there was in New York, Eric Adams. I don't know if he signed legislation, but he did talk about addressing like the drill music and the real conflicts that came out of that. So yes, that part of it is certainly something that plays a role in gun violence. But again, I don't think that should overshadow, because if you remove the music, right? If you remove rap music or drill music or whatever, these communities still have problems. These communities still have a ton of guns. These communities are still poor. Rap music is not leading some people to pick up a gun. People are going to pick up a gun regardless because of the way these communities are set
Some
up.
of that drill music is almost like a folk story or something, just for the inner city. Like you have like guys who are, you know, in the barrio or other places, and that's kind of like what they tell their stories. It's a violent culture. There was a guy, I forgot his name, but like he didn't make it. He had an encounter, I think, in Miami and got shot. He had like 12 confirmed kills. I forgot
King
his
Von.
name. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly. And somebody was trying to get me to do a show. I was like, is this really real? Is this guy really that intense? And he really was. He really was. He was just a guy who grew up on the streets. Maybe some of the characters in your book, like him, man, which is really incredible. We are at the 40-minute mark, Josiah. Where are you working? I saw that you're at website writing for the Griot right now, right? Can you talk about maybe some of your other work, what you've been working on, and then talk about where people can find In These Streets?
Yeah, so I'm actually not with the Griot anymore, but I was most recently writing about a lot of this stuff along with some other issues impacting the Black community. But I've officially signed on to work on a second book.
Oh, nice. Congrats.
Which will be about elite police squads and the impact that they've had in different communities. So it's kind of looking at the formation of somebody. I don't know if you're familiar with what happened with Tyree Nichols in Memphis, the young man that was killed by officers in the Scorpion unit.
Yeah, right. That's right. They were all African American too, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think I've seen the video and the story of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's basically looking at teams like that in different cities and kind of the impact that they've had and why police departments created them and what their role ultimately turned into over the past 20, 30 years. So that's something I'm excited to be working on. And yeah, just doing more coverage of this topic, and trying to get the book out there as much as I can.
So if you're not at the Griot, are you affiliated with any outfit or network or anything like that right now?
I'm freelancing right now.
Do you have a Substack?
I do, yes.
What's the name of it?
It's Josiah. It's called In the Margins. Yeah. And I can share.
I'll put a link to it in the show notes. In the Margins, Josiah Bates. And your book also, you can get it in multiple formats, right?
Yes, you can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, wherever you get books. It's also there's a Kindle version as well. If you just go to my website, josiahbates.com, and you can buy it there. I have links to it there. But yeah,
can people get a signed copy if they want?
Yeah, they can. I would definitely do that. I've signed some copies and mailed a few out. So yeah, I would definitely do that.
Let me see if I can pull your website up real quick. I'll put your website up in the show notes. Here it is right here. So people can go there. And is that the best? If anybody has any follow-up questions or wants to contact you through your website, is probably the optimal place.
Yeah, that's the best way. And my Substack is there too. Up where the logos are. So yeah, that's the best way people can get in touch with me.
Excellent. And you're on like Twitter too. So
yeah.
But yeah, I'll put a link to your Substack and your website. And thanks so much for your time and congrats on the book. It's really well written. And I like the approach you had. It's very like you kind of see it from other people's perspective, not some detached, academic ivory tower approach. So good job. Name of the book again. Yeah, thank you. In These Streets, the name of the book, In These Streets, reporting from the front lines of Inner City Gun Violence, just published May 2024, and the author is Josiah Bates, Bates. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, stay there.